Okay, hello everybody. Good afternoon, happy Friday, last day of Infocom. You can see some smiley faces and some tired faces here. I'd like to introduce our panelists for this very relevant session on live events in the Metaverse, which seems to be a buzzword going around at the moment, and particularly at Infocom. So I'm going to start from the end there. I'm going to introduce you to Matt Ward from the Fuse Technical Group, Joshua Kell from Esports Integration and Horizon AVL, and last but not least, Adrian, Rashad, Driscoll, who is from Collimation. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
I'm going to ask you to each introduce yourselves, but only for 20 seconds because we are quite tight on time. Matt, would you like to start by introducing what you do and what is your...
I run a small research group for Fuse Technical Group, and we're looking at new applications and ways that technology can be used in novel ways. And mostly I'm just curious and have an irrational belief that things are possible right up until they aren't. So it's following things through is kind of a key part. Curiosity
is your superpower. Great. Josh?
My name is Joshua Kell. I'm the CEO of Horizon AVL and Esports Integration. So Horizon AVL, we're a 40-year-old AV integration firm. About 7 years ago, we designed a whole division dedicated to esports. Primarily, we work in the education market. We've worked with over 140 colleges and universities across the US. We've helped them build their curriculum, the roadmap planning and design, and we also build the facilities from a design perspective. And then from a superpower perspective, I would say, thinking outside the box from a creativity standpoint, a lot of our clients want to bring these career pathways, this curriculum, and they want to make an inviting space for the students. And so we really walk them through that narrative.
Excellent, Thank you. And Adrian?
Adrian Rashad Driscoll, co-founder of Collimation. We do experiences. Some are in AR, VR, some are in 2D, some have just audio. I think my superpower would be telling stories. Everything's a narrative. Everything has to start with narrative. We make sure that that's what we really focus on. So that's about it. Yeah, telling stories.
Excellent. Okay, so let's talk about this buzzword, the Metaverse. I don't want to sort of talk about what it is, but more how do we differentiate what we've all been through over the last 2 years, which is going to virtual events and then hybrid events. So how is the Metaverse different to virtual and hybrid events? Adrian, if I can start with you.
Sure. I mean, the Metaverse is just a digital extension of yourself, So I think in the last couple of years, it's become more prominent, but it's been around. I mean, Second Life was a version of the Metaverse, People are going to create avatars in ways that they identify with that may not have been accessible to them before. And then you extend that to how you go to events and how you consume daily life, and it's not going anywhere. It's going to be an extension of what our life IRL is now.
And Josh, do you think there's a difference between virtual hybrid events and what is the Metaverse just a new name for virtual events?
I would say so. I think it's actually a little bit more complicated than that. Is it just a rebranding or a reskinning of hybrid events? I think it goes a lot deeper into the social interactions, and especially when we look at it from an esports perspective. What is the engagement with the players, with also the community? Twitch is really somewhat a form of that, right? We've been interacting with other people across the globe through this platform of watching a game, but then simultaneously we're interacting.
Yeah, and Matt, what's your view on the Metaverse and it's kind of where it intersects with live events?
I would say that we don't know yet, which is kind of a very fuzzy answer. But I look at what we've done the last 2 years during the pandemic and virtual events in general, and I don't see them as that different from existing sort of remote conferencing. It's just scaled up. There's no spatial awareness. I mean, Second Life isn't that different from even games that precede that by a decade, where we're engaged multiple people in a space. So to be in the metaverse, I think you have to take that person, you have to take yourself, and it has to bridge where you are now and where you are in that virtual space.
Right.
And for that to be persistent and, and connected, and we're working on it, but I don't think we have any experiences that, or maybe we have very few experiences that really would qualify.
Yeah, I guess, Adrian, it comes back to that storytelling piece, doesn't it? It's, how do we create something with purpose? And so what would your advice be for, I guess we're sitting in a room, I'm guessing the audience are live event producers, production companies, and if they want to kind of make a move into the metaverse world, then how do they start with the story, the narrative?
It's experience first, There are benefits, like you can't replace in real life, and you shouldn't go to try to replace it. It should be an extension. If you're doing anything that has to do with AR, VR, what are the benefits of it? Understanding that not everybody's going to put a headset on. There are just going to be people who won't ever do it. Not everybody wants to hold their phone up for AR for 20 minutes. Like, you have to think about this. How can it be beneficial to the audience? Once you have that in mind and your narrative focus, as opposed to using the gimmick of immersive media or the metaverse, and you say, hey, do you want a party in Atlanta or Atlantis? These are things that you can create without the raw materials. Maybe you extend that, but it has to be a benefit to the user, or it will always shine through as just a gimmick.
And once you've kind of, you've figured out what your purpose is, and you know that the metaverse will be of benefit, then Matt, a question to you is, how do you then go about researching into where to start and what to do? It's so huge. Where would you advise is the best sort of place to start?
I mean, people have been experimenting with this for a long time. The whole concept of spatial computing, what Microsoft was imagining they might do with Kinect. You look at earlier, like time-of-flight cameras, and attempting to map people in real time. So all of these things connect. Holoplot, who are just down the aisle here, are doing spatialized audio. So you can control and localize experiences for individual people in that space. But none of that really works personally if it doesn't know it's me. So in that environment, I should be hearing something, and you may be hearing something completely different, but it should be for me. If it's just because I'm standing on an X, I don't think it qualifies.
Yeah.
There has to be that connection, and you as an individual have that portability to take yourself through those spaces. So like Bluetooth LE, where it's sensing your phone in a store. How does that mature to where it's actually useful?
Right.
I think there's a lot of questions like that where the technology's there, but somebody has to put it all together.
Yeah, and that's the tricky part. Josh, what would your advice be on that?
I mean, I would definitely second that. I think we have parts and pieces of what can come together as a collective solution, but someone that needs to pioneer that concept to put it together has been sort of, I think, the challenge where we are today. And so, once again, taking it back to specifically from an esports perspective, we have parts and pieces from an XR, VR gaming perspective that exists in gaming and esports. But to fully apply that and to drop that into the metaverse itself, it still needs to be hashed out. We still have a long way to go.
But I feel like esports is a very progressive sector.
It is. It is a very progressive sector. I mean, just look at. Well, it's a cultural thing as well, right? If I look where I am as a gamer, right, playing competitive esports almost 20 years ago, it's very different than it is today. My two kids are experiencing it very different than how I did growing up, and the generation older has no understanding of it, and so it is progressive, but it is also driven by that culture in a lot of ways from an esports perspective, and the metaverse will be driven by that culture too. Simultaneously, they're into it. We were talking earlier, they just don't care sometimes. The younger generation, they'll just get on Instagram and start posting, and they just don't care about that process, and so they kind of throw themselves into that world without really thinking about some of the outcomes of what that would be.
Is that a positive, or could it be a negative as well? I mean, will that next gen sort of forget how to interact IRL at in-person events? Does the metaverse have its downsides?
I would definitely say so. I think when we look at like these events, these large events, we're back in person, and I hear all the time it's good to be back, because there is that level of human interaction and connection that we as a culture and society and as humans desire, right? We desire that level of connection. Virtually, we can simulate that, and I think we could get pretty close to that, but there's still something about touch and interaction from that perspective that's very intimate, and I think that's very key.
I think it's also important to think, though, or to remember that most of us desire that experience. There's a lot of people who, during the pandemic, they've experienced this sort of retreat into a comfort zone, where all this interaction and going to big events, like maybe they never really liked it, but they did it because their friends are doing it, and now they have access to a lot of that, but they don't have to be in the middle of a big crowd, and or they don't have to, like, in person address somebody. They can just do it online, and so I think there's going to be like different approaches.
Sure,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Adrian?
I mean, it's a fear that's been huge for everybody, but I mean, you think about it, like when texting came out, people quit calling on the phone. Like it was drastic. It's like, oh my gosh, people can't talk anymore. They'd be right next to you, can have a conversation with you, and they just want to text you instead. So it's a tool. Using things in the metaverse versus IRL, these are just tools. But I think opening metaverse options up and making everything hybrid lets people consume things the way they want to consume it. Not everybody wants to be in a big crowd. Some people thrive on it, and it's now you have these extra ability to say, hey, look, do it how you want. So now it becomes inclusive, which I think is important because it builds that community.
That's a really important point, is that it is an enabler of inclusivity, and children, elderly, people that can't travel, people that have are introverts, perhaps don't like going to events. It opens up a whole new world for them. So there is the benefit. The silver lining is the accessibility issue. Matt, what are your thoughts on accessibility and the metaverse sort of opening up this whole new world for people?
Well, I think that goes back to it being tied to your personal preferences. And so if you are somebody who does not like going out as much, an experience can be tailored for your enjoyment at home, your engagement at home, and or in smaller groups. Because sometimes, like I had a friend, one kid wanted to go to the big high school, the other kid needed to go to the small high school. It's thriving in those different environments. And why do we all need to have the exact same path through these experiences, which goes to story, because you have to change the story.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to think of the narrative differently in terms of pacing and scale for these different consumers. And that offers some opportunities, though, to target, to engage in different ways. And that's one of the things that I think is missing, going back to the first question of were all these virtual events that? And really, no. In a weird way, before the pandemic, we were just starting to see events acknowledge that not everybody coming to the event had the same desire to be jumped on by salespeople and engage in large groups. And we made it easier for people to flag their preferences. And sort of the pandemic wiped all that away, but also maybe opened some doors for us to do a better job at it.
So you mentioned that it's important to look at everyone's experience as their own. Everyone has individual experiences, and some people prefer in person and some people virtual. So is it important for live events companies to have if you're working on one event, for example, to have a digital metaverse strategy or journey, audience journey, and another one for in-person attendees, so their experience is different. Do you think it's important to differentiate those and have different sort of plans for different experiences for one event? Adrian, it looks like you're thinking about that one.
him.
You're thinking about that.
No, I mean, I've had companies come to me for forever and say, hey, what can we do in VR? What can we do in AR? Like, sometimes it doesn't belong, and I think not every event is going to find a need for a metaverse strategy. There are going to be events that are 10 people big. You want me to go create a metaverse footprint for your 10 people? What value is it adding? I do think that if you do decide to implement a metaverse segment or an addition or make this a leg of it, that you have to look at it differently, because it is different. And there's no cookie cutter approach that's going to solve everything, because people consume things differently.
Tell us your approach in the world of esports. How do you approach the metaverse? And
Well, it is all based upon the event, the experience, the game. Something that is large like Overwatch or League of Legends is a lot different than maybe a mobile game that is being played on our phones, right? So your audience is going to be completely different. And those large events sort of already consider the online community, because esports and gaming is such an online community, right? That's where we live, we thrive, right?
Yeah.
We've been operating in that mindset way before a pandemic ever came around, right? So we already sort of understood that. And so when we're designing and developing these strategies, that interaction for the online community is part of that experience. But has that been thought out also by the software developers? Because that actually opens up a whole new level of questions and understandings, because they have the game itself, they have the engines that build these games. We can extract all of that and then immerse the online user into a deeper experience. And so, but that's still, that's development that needs to happen. And there already have been directions with XR and VR, and there have been those seeds that have been planted, but really it's still in its infancy stages.
But there's something about those specific experiences that I think is really important carrying forward, which is you look at those esports and games, and you have an account.
Yes.
You have an identity.
Yep.
And there's a reason Facebook, as a conglomerate, is so interested in this area, and it is because it's about identity. If you're going to have portability across all these experiences, you need to be tracked across them, and that's valuable.
Absolutely.
But this doesn't work. If I go to your thing and I have one experience, and then I go to another thing in a week, and I have to set up and have my experience, unless it's connected to me, it's not going to be persistent. It's not going to follow me on from there. And that should be opt-in, obviously, but it should be something where you just do, and you sort of collect all this going forward, because why are we inputting all this data, and what if we want to go back? Why are we going to have the same experience?
Yeah.
If we go to Illuminarium here, it's like it should know I went through there last week, and it should be able to adapt the story. And that's all possible, but we need to do a whole bunch of work to get there.
Yeah, we're not quite there yet, are we? There's quite a few steps to go. What do you think the steps that we need to take, Adrian, to get to that point?
I mean, having something that goes across mediums. I think a lot of companies are focused on competition. There's no room for competition yet. People are still getting in, and it's like, if I have an avatar system that I identify with, it knows me. This is what I've built. I shouldn't have to build another one for another platform. I shouldn't have to, and there are companies like Ready Player Me and, that are creating avatars, and they're trying to be hey, agnostic. And things like that are huge goals, but you have to have community feedback to say, what is that going to look like? It's agnostic, but what's it going to look like? What's it going to feel like? What's really important? And a lot of companies think they know, but you don't know anything. It's your audience. You can build the best platform in the world. If no one sees it, then it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant, and that's just the truth.
So it sounds like the future is more about sort of collaboration and collaboration between companies, between different communities to really enhance the experience for the user.
So. Yeah.
Is that happening in the esports industry a lot?
Yeah.
Is it quite a collaborative industry?
When every software developer does their game differently, right? And so the way that even the platforms in which you're logging into the game is even different. There's platforms like Steam that kind of bring a bunch of titles together, but from a gaming perspective, it's still very segmented from each experience, each game, each competition, and so there needs to be sort of a general collaboration that needs to come together to bring that in.
Yeah. I just want to move on to skills. In terms of, the metaverse isn't going away. It's here, and we all realise that it's going to be a game changer for many sectors, including live events. So, if companies are to, thrive and survive, they will need the skills to be able to execute a metaverse strategy, whether it's a small strategy or a large-scale strategy. Where are those skills coming from? Is there an abundance of skills? Is it a case of nurturing and finding those skills? What's happening in that space at the moment?
I'll take the approach from the education side. So our team has written several majors and minors in the esports world. That's everything from content creation, broadcast, IT, cybersecurity, marketing. All of those actually can contribute to the metaverse themselves. And just so you know, from an AV perspective, we have a pretty large shortage of skilled AV individuals that we as integrators are always challenged with.
Yeah.
We're trying to find an installer, we're trying to find a programmer. We're lacking in skill even in just the AV integration world. And so our goal and directive has been, how do we use something like esports as a vessel to then develop the career and pathways that we need, and we sort of did it selfishly, so that we can find talented individuals that are going through production and audio engineering and video production, and now we sort of have this footprint and our pulse on what colleges and universities, what high schools. We've written a full 4-year national CTE core standard high school curriculum that will feed into colleges.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it has to start early, and it has to start with the adoption of these concepts from a perspective, and then to move them through from a higher education.
Yeah, and that's brilliant. It's so good to hear that you are starting early and you're sharing that knowledge and you've written a curriculum, because that's the only way. If you start at the very early stages, you're going to it's going to become part of the fabric. Yeah. And Matt, what are you seeing in terms of skills? Josh mentioned there is generally a skills shortage in the AV industry. So how are we as an industry going to excel in the metaverse space?
Change. Now, networking, which is all over this hall, is obviously going to be critical, but understanding storytelling, having a background in theater, there's all sorts of things that come to bear here. We have a group called Framework that originally was focused on real-time content, but in the pandemic shifted to online and bounced through different sort of virtual conference setups, and we'll eventually do a in real life event this coming year. But Framework's focused on education and sharing information, and it's media server people who do a lot of the real-time content for virtual production for XR stages. So one of the other founders worked on the Katy Perry video that really helped launch interest in XR. So Berto over there has done a lot of amazing stuff. And so including AR for BTS and bringing AR into into concert environments. And all of these people are actively trying to have conversation, educate new people coming into the space, because we are at a point where it's growing. We don't have the talent, and we're still learning. So it's a time when people are really open. Like if you have a question, you can ask somebody else, and they will supply an answer.
And I guess that's where collaboration comes back into it, because everyone's learning, everyone's in the same boat. It's important to collaborate and share the knowledge and educate each other.
Yeah, we're also, Fuse is setting up a XR stage on 42nd Street in New York. And part of the mandate is that a big chunk of that time is for education and training. And it's partnerships with manufacturers, but it's also part of this experimentation and creating a bubble in which we can try things out.
Yeah.
So,
Adrian, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and then when it, you have to start. You have to start early. I'm all about educating. And then once you get there, you're in the hiring process, letting go of the traditional, I'm over your shoulder every second, because that's when you stifle the creativity. That's when you lose all the people who can do these things. And like, anybody can learn Unity, anybody can learn Unreal, anybody can learn these engines that power the metaverse, very strongly. But most of the time, they don't have the opportunity, because it's like, stay in your lane. No, you're a marketing guy. Well, there are a lot of things in XR that could apply to marketing, but they never have the opportunity because they have a tech company that is being run by someone who has very traditional, old school way of, you have to do what I say. Then how are you going to innovate if you don't allow your employees to be innovative?
Okay, so we've got a couple of minutes left. I'm going to ask each one of you, this time next year, where do you think we'll have progressed to in terms of the metaverse and live events? I'm going to ask the audience first. If you've got any questions, we've got a couple of minutes. Ask on Slido, and I can ask the panelists the questions on your behalf. So, Josh, I come to you.
I wish I had a crystal ball.
Future gaze for us slightly. Help us out.
Yeah, so let me try to peer into my virtual crystal ball for a moment. I think technology is, well, goodness gracious. One, I hope that supply chain issues become better than what they are, because that will help this whole progress move along. But there are a lot of creative people out there. I think we're going to be a little better than where we are presently. Obviously, it's progressing along, and it's going to be talking more about it. A lot of these manufacturers are going to start keying in, as they did with esports, right? It's taken years for esports to become where it is today, but I wouldn't even be able to get a percentage, but I would just say I definitely see we're going to see a little bit more traction in the metaverse by this time next year.
Matt?
I'm going to echo some of this. If anybody has a 400 gig switch that'll do PTP, come meet me at the stage after the show. That I could get in the next, okay. So I'll carry it off the show floor. I mean, maybe. But no, in a year, I think it's going to be like 80% odds that you're having this same conversation with 3 different people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We're at that point where you need a moment of crystallization. And is it Apple releasing AR glasses? Mm-hmm. Is it, like something will happen, because even with the iPhone, which is sort of a great example of this, all the ingredients for that were around for years. Mm-hmm. It just took somebody with some vision and some discipline to strip away the junk and get to the basic building blocks so that people could access it. So it's not for some eccentric hobbyist. Like, I own touchscreen smartphones that predate the iPhone by 2 years. Mm. And were they good? They were phones.
Right.
But so I think it's hard to say, but odds are we don't get there in the next year.
Okay. And Adrian, final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we're before this becomes a thing, like everyone's doing, we're 10 years out. Like, realistically, come on, in a year we're going to be a little bit better. There are a few big barriers. When it comes to immersive media headsets, they can't look so crazy. Once we get to something that looks like your Ray-Bans, it's actually more than just an AR overlay, and it could be, when you don't stand out by wearing it, it's going to be great. You know, right now we're at the early adoption stage. A bunch of us nerds are like, yeah, let's get it, and it's great. You know, to get everyone in, it has to be like, oh, I can do this and still be cool. I could do this and still, you know, keep that coolness factor. But yeah, in a year, it will be better. There will be more people, but it's not going to be the turnkey that everyone's hoping for probably about 10 years, I think.
Step by step.
Absolutely.
10
Okay.
years.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It sounds like be curious, collaborate with each other, educate each other. The metaverse is here to stay.
Absolutely.
But the most important thing is the narrative and how you embed it in your storytelling. Don't use technology for technology's sake.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you, audience.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.